Okay, this is a video for Unit 9 on trigonometry, Target 1. This is part 2 of a two-part video series to go with, sorry, can't do two things at once. So part 2 of the videos for Target 1. The first video talked about 45, 45, 90 triangle, and part 2 is going to talk about the 30, 60, 90 triangle. So let's come to a clean space here. All right, I'm going to start by trying to draw an equilateral triangle, because the first triangle that we looked at, 45, 45, 90, came from an isosceles right triangle. The second triangle comes from the fact that if we take an equilateral triangle and we cut it in half with a perpendicular bisector, we know that all the angles in the equilateral triangle are 60 degrees. And so if I cut it in half, that makes the smaller angle a 30-degree angle. And so we're looking at a 30, 60, 90 triangle. And what we did in class was we looked at some ratios, like if I give this a length 1 on the bottom right of my triangle, I know that the bottom left of my triangle is also a 1 because I just drew a perpendicular bisector, so it's a midpoint. If this and this are both 1, if those are the same because they are with the midpoint, then they add up to 2. And since this is an equilateral triangle, all the sides are 2. So what we see initially is that this short side that we had cut in half, because we cut the bottom in half, is always going to be half of the hypotenuse. And that's one of the ratios that we use. We also could do Pythagorean theorem to find the altitude or the height of the triangle. Okay, and so I could do 1 squared plus, let's call this b. B squared is equal to 2 squared. So 1 plus b squared equals 4. B squared equals 4 minus 1, which is 3. And b equals square root of 3. And so the height is always going to be a square root of 3 ratio compared to the other two sides of the triangle. Here's one way to look at that. For a 30, 60, 90 triangle, the hypotenuse is twice as long as the shorter leg. And the longer leg is square root of 3 times as long as the shorter leg. So we're always going to have a short side of the triangle, a short leg of the triangle across from the 30-degree angle. We're always going to have a long leg or side of the triangle that is across from the 60-degree angle. And then the hypotenuse is still across from the right angle. And so they showed with this picture kind of the ratios that you're using, a 2, a 1, or a square root 3. And so we kind of refer to those as 1, square root of 3, and 2 for the short, the long, and the hypotenuse. And the reason that I put them in that order is because that's the order of smallest to greatest. This is 1. Square root of 3 is about 1.73, and then the hypotenuse is 2. So the side lengths go in order of how big they are. And that's also shown in this bubble. They use x, x root 3, and 2x to show that x could be any number. So we're going to go through some examples of how to use this ratio. For all of these problems, we're starting with the short side. Every time you have the short side, you are going to multiply to get the larger sides. The reason for this is because the ratios we're using, 2 and square root of 3, are both larger than 1. So if I'm taking a small number, or taking a small side of the triangle, and I'm trying to get a larger side of the triangle, I need to make my number bigger. So we're going to do that by multiplying. When you do your 30, 60, 90 triangle, when you see your 30, 60, 90, you can go into each triangle before you do anything and you could write down the ratios. The short side is 1, the long side is 3, the hypotenuse is 2. On to B. The short side is 1, the long side is root 3, the hypotenuse is 2. And then C, the short side is 1, the long side is root 3, the hypotenuse is 2. And we did an activity in class that showed that that relationship was true for a bunch of different examples. And what we're studying in trigonometry is that given certain angles, like 30 degrees, regardless of the size of the triangle, if I have a 30-degree angle or a 60-degree angle in my triangle, these ratios will always be the ratios to use. Now, how to use them. we're going to take my short side and we're going to multiply by the ratios to get the other parts. So to get the long side, since that ratio is square root of 3, I'm going to say 4 times square root of 3. And that's my answer. To get the hypotenuse, I'm going to say 4 times 2. 4 times 2 is 8. So that's my answer. So A is equal to 8, B is equal to 4 square root 3, which is a decimal. I could figure that out. But right now I'm just going to leave it as square root of 3. For the second triangle, B, I'm going to take 3/2 times the ratio, which is square root of 3. So 3 square root 3 over 2 is how we write 3/2 times square root 3. To go to the hypotenuse, we multiply times 2. So 3/2 times 2 is going to give me 6/2, which reduces to 3. I do encourage you to do almost all of these problems without using a calculator, because you are going to be expected to do so on your test, working with multiplying, dividing these small numbers, working with the square roots without using your calculator. For choice C, same thing. To take the short side and get the longer side, I need to multiply by square root 3. So I'm going to do that down here. Y equals 2 square root of 2 times square root of 3. So I took the side I had, multiplied it by square root of 3, and so that gives me 2 square root of 6. When you have two different square roots multiplied, you can multiply them together. So 2 root 6 is the length for y. To get the x value, I take that short side and I multiply it times 2. So 2 square root 2 times 2 is going to give me 4 square root 2. 2 times 2 is 4, and that's equal to x. If you missed this day in class, it'd be a great idea for you to go in and talk with your teacher or myself to kind of go through this and answer any questions that you have. We'll go over a couple more examples, but the video is getting long already, so we'll do just a couple more examples. Option A, I have the hypotenuse. So I want to find the short side first. The short side is V. So to go backwards from the ratio, remember my ratio was 1 square root of 3 for the long side, long side, and 2 for the hypotenuse. I'm going to divide by the ratio I have already. So 12 divided by 1 is not what I want, because that just gives me another 12. 12 divided by 2 gives me a 6. Once I have that short side, I can multiply by square root of 3. 6 times square root of 3. And that's my answer. You can pause for a moment, see if you can do option B. If this is 10 for the hypotenuse, 10 divided by 2 is 5. And then 5 times root 3 gives you your ratios. Do one more. If I have 10 root 2 and I want to find the short side, again, I'm dividing by 2 because that's the ratio on the hypotenuse. 1 on the short side and root 3 on the long side. So 10 root 2 divided by 2 is 5 root 2. I then take that short side times square root of 3, and I get 5 root 6. And the last example I'll give is with the long side. You can go back and look at the notes posted from class, add some different examples. I'm going to do A and C. So for A, I take the long side, and to get the short side, that ratio again was 1 square root of 3 and 2. So I'm going to take the long side divided by root 3. So 2 root 3 divided by root 3 is 2, because 3 divided by 3 is 1. And then to go from the short side to the hypotenuse, I multiply by 2. So that gives me a 4. This last one requires a little bit of work, like one of the examples from before in the first video, because what I need to do to get the y value is I need to divide by square root of 3. 9 divided by square root of 3. But we don't want to leave the answer like that. So what we talked about in the first video is that you can multiply the square root by itself, That's a way to rationalize the denominator. So on the top of the fraction, I have 9 root 3. And on the bottom of the fraction, I have square root of 9, which is equal to 3. Then I can simplify my fraction. 9 over 3 is just 3. And so y is equal to 3 root 3. And then if I want the hypotenuse, I can double that. So the hypotenuse doubled would become 6 root 3. So I don't want to keep going with too much time on the video. So if you have more questions, please come in for help. You can also watch the homework videos for each of the questions in the homework.